Maxwell Clark was, by all accounts, a nobody. That is, until everything changed on a Tuesday morning. It was the kind of day where the city seemed both too alive and too tired at the same time. The kind of day when the air seemed thicker than usual, as though it might rain, but didn't. New York had that feeling, now more than ever. A haze of floating dust, the remnants of a world that was both perfectly controlled and completely unstable. Max sat at his usual spot in the diner, sipping on synthetic coffee, the kind that tasted like cardboard but somehow kept him going. He had been at the same job for 6 years, an underpaid technician for an old firm that installed maintenance systems for gravity fields, technology that, on the surface, was used for all sorts of practical purposes like construction, transportation, and personal mobility. But Max knew better. Everyone knew better. The world was ruled by gravity, by the artificial gravitational regime, AGR, a regime that used gravity as a tool of control, a way to keep the masses in check. Max's mind wasn't on the world, though. His mind was on his lunch break. He was staring into his empty coffee cup, his head lost in thought, when the door of the diner chimed with a jarring, mechanical sound that pulled him back to reality. A woman stepped in, and Max barely noticed her at first. That was until she walked straight to his table and slid into the booth across from him with a confident air. She was striking, dressed in sleek metallic fabrics that shimmered like liquid metal. It was the kind of look that didn't belong in a place like this, especially not in a world where people tried so hard to blend in. Her eyes were sharp, dark, almost piercing. She gave him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the kind of smile that suggested she knew something he didn't, and she was about to change that. "Max Clark," she said, her voice a low purr, "I've been looking for you." Max blinked, unsure whether he was dreaming or if he had just gotten a little too used to the stale, artificial environment of the diner. His eyes darted to the door, but no one was watching. No one ever did. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice half a question, half a challenge. The woman's smile widened. "You can call me Eva." "And I'm here because you're coming with me," she said. Before he could even open his mouth to protest, Max raised an eyebrow. He was about to ask who the hell she thought she was, but then she did something strange. Something that stopped his breath in its tracks. She handed him a small silver object, no larger than a marble. Before Max could take it, she placed it in his hand. It felt warm, too warm, and suddenly, his chair began to rise from the floor. Max didn't even have time to react. The entire diner seemed to tilt beneath him, as if gravity itself was suddenly working against him. His feet lifted from the ground, and for a split second, his heart skipped a beat. "What the hell?" he began, but Eva cut him off. "You're levitating, Max. Your body's attuned to gravity. Don't worry, I've got you." The chair floated a few inches above the ground, just enough to send a surge of adrenaline through Max's body. His grip tightened around the silver device in his hand, and within moments, his chair slowly returned to its original position. The diner was quiet again, as though nothing had happened. Max sat there, stunned. Eva leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with something like excitement. "I'm with the resistance. You're part of a much bigger story, Max. It's time you stopped pretending you don't know who you really are." Max's mouth went dry. "What the hell are you talking about?" Eva glanced around the diner, making sure no one was paying attention. The people at the counter continued their quiet chatter, oblivious to the fact that Max's chair had just lifted a few inches off the ground. She leaned closer, her voice soft but urgent. "Max, you have a gift. A rare one. You can control gravity." Max stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. His heart was still racing, and his mind refused to make sense of it all. He was an engineer, sure. He worked with gravity fields every day, but he was hardly some kind of superhero. He was just a guy who showed up to work, did his job, and went home. "Listen," Eva continued, "there's a war happening. A global war, but it's not the kind of war you see on the surface. The artificial gravitational regime controls the world now, Max. Every building, every car, every person, everything is governed by their control of gravity. And they've been using it to keep the masses in check for decades. Max shook his head. You're crazy. The AGR is everywhere, but they're just a bunch of corporate drones. They control cities with gravity, sure. But they're not some evil empire. Eva's smile faded. You don't get it, do you? The AGR is much more than that. They're manipulating reality itself, Max. They're not just controlling cities. They're controlling minds. They've used gravity to enslave humanity, adjusting the force of gravity to make people compliant. Those who fall in line are lighter, freer to move. Those who resist are weighed down. It's not just a tool, it's a weapon. Max couldn't breathe. His thoughts were spinning. This couldn't be real. It just couldn't. But the way Eva spoke, the certainty in her eyes, made him wonder if he had been asleep this whole time, missing something obvious. Why me? He managed to say, his voice hoarse. Why are you telling me all this? Eva's eyes softened. Because you're special, Max. You've always been special. You have the ability to resist their control. You can change gravity, not just for yourself, but for the whole world. Max's mind reeled. For the first time in years, something in him stirred. He had always felt that there was something strange about him, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He'd never been great at following rules, at staying in line, and when things didn't make sense, he often found a way to break free. But he had no idea it was because he could control gravity. Come with me, Eva urged, her voice intense. The resistance is waiting. You're part of something bigger than you could ever imagine. You can help us take down the AGR, Max. Max hesitated, staring at her, the weight of the decision pressing on him like an invisible force. I don't know if I'm ready. Eva reached out and placed her hand on his. Her touch was steady, confident. You don't need to be. We'll help you. The world doesn't need another follower. It needs someone who can change the rules. You can be that person. Max's heart raced, but for the first time, it wasn't from fear. It was from something else, a spark, a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the change he had been waiting for, the shift he had been hoping for all along. Slowly, he stood, still gripping the silver device in his hand, and followed Eva out of the diner. The world was waiting. Max's feet hit the ground with an unfamiliar lightness. He had barely realized that he was walking through the streets of the city with Eva, who led him through alleyways and side streets, moving quickly and quietly. It was as if she knew exactly where to go and how to avoid the prying eyes of the AGR's ever-present surveillance drones. The sound of buzzing drones echoed in the distance, but they were soon lost in the vast urban labyrinth of old buildings, some suspended precariously in mid-air, thanks to the AGR's gravity control, while others sank low, almost as if they were being sucked into the Earth's gravitational pull. Max had lived in this city his entire life, but he was seeing it for the first time through a new lens. Eva glanced back at him over her shoulder, her pace steady, her face cool and composed. Keep up. We're almost there. Max felt like he should say something, maybe ask another question, but the words felt stuck in his throat. Everything felt so surreal now. Just a few hours ago, he was eating a virtual pizza, living his routine existence, unaware that gravity itself was the leash that had been holding him back. Now, here he was, following a woman who had just claimed he was capable of destroying or remaking the world itself. Why me? He finally blurted out again, though he knew the answer in his gut. She had told him already, but he needed to hear it again, to solidify it in his mind. Eva slowed her pace for a moment, glancing at him as if considering the question. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes never losing their focus. Because the world's systems are built on a lie, Max. The AGR controls everything through gravity manipulation, what we feel, how we move, how we think. It's a delicate balance, and it's vulnerable. But not to the AGR. To you. Max frowned. That doesn't make sense. If gravity's such a big deal, why don't they just make it impossible for anyone to fight back? If they control gravity, doesn't that mean they can do whatever they want? Eva's eyes narrowed. It's not as simple as that. They control the world's infrastructure, the major cities. But what they don't understand is that gravity, the force itself, can't be fully controlled by technology alone. There's an organic connection to it, a resonance, something more profound than they ever imagined. Something you've unknowingly tapped into. Max stumbled slightly, his thoughts spiraling as he processed her words. A resonance. He didn't know what that meant, but deep down, it felt right. It felt like something he had always sensed but never understood. Eva stopped walking and turned toward him. They had reached an old, rusted gate, hidden behind an overgrown patch of trees. It looked like a forgotten entrance, a remnant of a time before gravity had been manipulated to such an extreme degree. Max could barely make out the insignia on the gate, a series of concentric rings, a symbol of gravitational fields. This is it, Eva said softly, the resistance base. Behind this gate is where everything starts. Max stared at the gate, then at Eva. The silence stretched for a moment, and then he nodded. They had arrived. Eva placed her hand on the gate, and it slowly creaked open. Max felt a shift in the air around him, a subtle change in the gravitational field. The ground beneath his feet seemed to hum with energy, as if something vast and hidden lay just beneath the surface of reality. Inside, the space opened up into a large underground facility. The walls were covered with screens, holograms, and maps, all displaying the same terrifying reality, the grip of the AGR on the world, spreading ever outward, tightening its control. There were people moving around, all of them focused, determined, with an edge of urgency in their actions. They paused only to glance at Max and Eva as they entered, acknowledging their presence before returning to their tasks. It was as if everyone here had a single purpose, a single mission. Eva led him down a narrow corridor into a smaller room, lit by the cool, blue glow of a holographic map. A tall man with short cropped hair and a stern face was standing in front of it, his fingers flicking through the projected screens. When he saw Eva and Max, he immediately straightened up and turned toward them. Eva, he said, his voice clipped, "You're back." "Is he?" "He's the one," Eva replied, her voice steady, but with an edge of excitement. "He's the key." Max shifted uncomfortably under their scrutiny. "I'm not so sure about that," he muttered. "I still don't get why I'm special. I don't feel like anything's changed." Eva gave him a reassuring look. "You haven't felt it yet, but you will. You'll understand soon." The man, his name was Agent Foster, Max learned quickly, nodded and motioned for them to follow him. They passed through several more corridors, all lined with high-tech equipment, some of which Max couldn't even begin to understand. Eventually, they reached a large chamber, its walls covered in shimmering holograms that shifted and flickered like fragmented pieces of a broken puzzle. At the center of the room was a strange, crystalline structure, pulsating with an ethereal glow. Max felt his heart skip a beat as he stared at it. He couldn't explain it, but something inside him tugged in the direction of the crystal, like a magnetic force pulling him closer. "This is it," Eva said, her voice low and serious. "This is the source of the AGR's power, the artifact. It controls the gravitational systems they've been using for decades. But more importantly, it's the key to everything." Max approached the crystal slowly, drawn to it by something he couldn't describe. As he got closer, the weight of the gravity around him seemed to shift, becoming lighter, more fluid. He felt his own body's resonance with the crystal, an inexplicable connection, as if he had known this moment would come. As his hand hovered just above the surface of the artifact, a deep hum reverberated through his chest, and for a split second, the world seemed to pulse around him. "Max," Agent Foster said, breaking his reverie, "this artifact, it can control the very fabric of reality. The AGR uses it to manipulate gravity, to maintain control over populations. It's how they stay in power. Max's mind reeled, but the sense of understanding was starting to take hold. This wasn't just about fighting back against an oppressive regime, it was about unlocking something much bigger, much deeper. Something that lay hidden in the very forces of the universe. But just as he reached out to touch the artifact, something unexpected happened. The room trembled. A harsh, mechanical whirring sound filled the air, and the holographic projections on the walls flickered violently. Max's heart raced as he stepped back, but it was too late. The gravity in the room shifted, pulling him off his feet. Eva grabbed him by the arm. "We've been compromised," she said urgently. "The AGR knows we're here. Get to the escape tunnel." Max's mind was spinning. Before he could react, the entire room began to bend and twist as if the very laws of gravity were being rewritten. The artifact's pulse became erratic, sending waves of gravitational energy through the room. Max felt his body being lifted, his feet leaving the ground, but he wasn't in control. Eva's grip tightened, and she dragged him toward a narrow passage hidden in the corner of the room. The walls were shifting around them, distorting the space as though reality itself was collapsing. Max's head was spinning, and the sound of the drones outside grew louder. "Focus, Max," Eva shouted over the chaos. "You have to control it. This is your moment. You're the one who can stop it." Max tried to steady his breathing, trying to ground himself as his body continued to float. He could feel it now, the hum of the artifact deep in his chest. There was no turning back. This was his moment, his chance to break free. He wasn't just following orders anymore, he was part of something bigger, something that would change everything. He closed his eyes, focused on the sensation of gravity, how it pulled, how it pushed, how it connected everything. His hand reached out, and he felt the pulse of the artifact align with his own. In that instant, Max understood. The entire room shifted again. But this time, Max was the one controlling it. He wasn't just floating now. He was the one making gravity bend to his will. Max's heart pounded in his chest as he stood in the center of the chaos, his mind reeling with the weight of the realization that he had unlocked something far beyond his understanding. The room was still vibrating with the strange, erratic energy emanating from the artifact, but now he felt in control. He felt the hum of gravity beneath his feet, around his body, the very force of the world around him, and for the first time, it was his to command. "Max!" Eva's voice cut through the distortion in the air, sharp and urgent. "We need to move. You've got this now. Control it." Max barely registered her words, his focus entirely on the pulsing artifact. He felt a connection to it now, a deep, organic bond, like the artifact and his own gravitational resonance were part of the same web, intertwined with the universe itself. The ground beneath him shifted once more, and without thinking, Max concentrated. The tremors of the room slowed, the overwhelming force of gravity halting as he focused on it. His feet gently returned to the floor, and he stood still, feeling the flow of power move through him, under him, around him. The gravitational waves were no longer chaotic, they were ordered, peaceful, controllable. Max breathed, his body adjusting to the rhythm of the force he was now wielding. The room settled into a momentary stillness, as if the world were waiting for him to decide what came next. Eva was still beside him, her face taut with urgency, but also a flicker of admiration. "We don't have much time," she urged, her voice low. "The AGR knows we're here now. They'll be sending reinforcements." Max turned his head, seeing the faint outline of shadows moving outside the door, just beyond the thin walls of the facility. His heart rate quickened again, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was something else, anticipation, resolve. He wasn't just the pawn in this game anymore. He was part of the revolution, the force that could change everything. He looked at Eva, meeting her eyes. "Lead the way." Eva gave a small, approving nod. Without another word, she turned and moved swiftly toward the hidden tunnel that Max had barely noticed before. Max followed her, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Every step felt different, like the very air around him was bending to his will. The tunnel was narrow, but the walls shimmered with the same otherworldly glow that the artifact had emitted. As they moved deeper, the gravity around them seemed to shift and warp, almost as if the entire structure was responding to the artifact's power. "How do we get out of here?" Max asked, his voice low as they moved quickly through the dim corridors. Eva didn't break her stride. "We have a few safe houses. We can lay low for a while. But after that, things will get much harder. The AGR won't stop until they've destroyed everything we've built." Max nodded. He could feel the weight of the mission settling in. The stakes were higher than ever. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for a world where gravity no longer held them captive, where the forces of nature weren't twisted into tools of oppression. As they approached the exit of the underground facility, the sound of drones grew louder, their whirring engines sending vibrations through the walls. Max's senses heightened, his body reacting instinctively. He could feel their presence before he saw them, waves of electromagnetic pulses from the drones, sending ripples through the air. "We need to move faster," Eva hissed. Max didn't need any more prompting. He reached out with his mind, extending his control over the gravity in the room. With a thought, the floor beneath him shifted, and suddenly the gravity in the tunnel was lighter. He leapt into the air, hovering slightly, then twisted the gravity around Eva so that she, too, floated upward. Together, they moved through the tunnel, no longer bound by the conventional rules of physics. Max's focus remained steady, but his mind kept wandering back to the artifact, to the ancient power it held. He knew that whatever this was, whatever had just happened, it wasn't just about power. It was about balance. The artifact, he sensed, was more than a tool for domination. It had the potential to rewrite the laws of nature, to return gravity to its natural state, to give people the ability to control it for themselves, but the AGR had twisted it into a weapon. And now Max had to make a choice: destroy the artifact and risk plunging the world into chaos, or take control of it and reshape everything. The tunnel opened up to the surface, and they emerged into the cool night air, the stars flickering above like distant beacons. Eva glanced over at Max, her face illuminated by the soft light of a street lamp. "Get ready," she said. "We're not out of the woods yet." Max took a deep breath, his pulse racing. As they made their way through the streets, he felt a strange sense of clarity. The world had changed, and so had he. No longer a mere bystander, he was a force, an anomaly in a world that had once seemed unchangeable. They reached an old, abandoned building, its dark windows glowing faintly with the soft light of hidden monitors. Eva led him inside, where they were met by more members of the resistance, hackers, former soldiers, scientists, each of them working together, each with a single, united goal: to bring down the AGR. The room was filled with the sound of quiet conversation and the hum of technology. Maps covered the walls, and various holographic screens displayed live feeds of the AGR's movements. It was like stepping into the heart of a storm, but Max felt oddly at peace. He had a part to play now. He had a purpose. Eva turned to him, her eyes serious. "This is it, Max. From here, we're going to make our move. The AGR has taken control of the world's major cities, but they're vulnerable. They think they control gravity, but they don't. You do. And it's time we show them just how much power they've been taking for granted." Max nodded, his mind already turning over the possibilities. The future of the world was within his grasp, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was truly in control. He could see it all now: cities floating, gravity returned to its natural balance, people free from the manipulation of the AGR. But first, they had to strike. Eva handed him a tablet, displaying a map of the AGR's central control hub. "We hit them at the core," she said. "Take down their control center, and everything else will fall. It won't be easy, but if we succeed, we'll break the chain that binds humanity." Max looked at the map, studying the target. The control center was located in the heart of one of the largest floating cities, a massive, gleaming structure suspended high above the ground. It was heavily fortified, but Max could already see the way in, through the manipulation of gravity. He wasn't just a pawn anymore. He was the key to the revolution. As the resistance members began preparing for the mission, Max stood back for a moment, the weight of the responsibility pressing on him. The power of gravity, of the world itself, was his to command. But with that power came a choice. He couldn't afford to make the wrong one. The next step in the fight for freedom was about to begin, and Max knew there would be no turning back. The world would never be the same again, and neither would he.